So anyways, let's just get into it. I want to talk about the updates that have happened to the Arena Cube since last time. I really enjoyed my time with the Arena Cube last time it was up. And I think, you know, they're just iterating on it and they're just improving it basically, right? There is, as time goes on with any cube, you know, you start with a small pool of cards and you kind of have to put some junkers in. You saw this, like, you know, a year ago when the Arena Cube first went up, there were some really bad cards. Like, I'm talking like 12 pick draft picks level cards, you know, and they really, you know, iterated and really started to update things. I think they've got it to a good place now. So let's just get into this. This iteration of the cube is more focused, right? They've taken out giant growth style cards. Like, I have no clue why this card was in the set. They took out like kind of the clunky build arounds. They took out these like 6 and 7 mana clunky cards like Harmonious Archon, Morog, basically. They've really just, each archetype is a lot more focused at this point, right? So basically what that means for your draft and your building is that you should expect to face more focused decks. I think before you could kind of get away with like these like piles of like mid-rangey good cards, and that was fine. And that still might be fine. But I think in the games I've played so far, in the games I've seen so far, and in the card list, the things that have changed, your opponents are just going to have focused, streamlined decks. They're going to curve out more often. Mana costs also start to shift down once they take this kind of stuff out, right? There's just room for more 2, 3, 4 good 2, 3, 4 mana cards, right? And so yeah, I would just say be careful of just, you know, this is a big overarching cube concept, but be careful of just taking good cards. I think in the previous iteration that was okay. I think as time goes on that gets worse. What they've done, and here's an example of what they've kind of done, is they've replaced some of those clunky or weird cards with more, you know, more utility effects, basically. More redundancy, right? There's more counter spells. Like, you know, you're going to get a deck with just a bunch of things to do on turn 3 with their mana, right? A mono blue control deck or a blue X control deck now has saw it coming in addition to the other counter spells, right? The ramp decks or decks that want like a turn 2 mana rock, which is like, you know, a reasonable number of decks in the format, just have more mana rocks now. We have Cold Steel Heart, we have Guardian Idol as 2 mana dorks. You know, the aggro decks especially. Now, there's some push and pull in this. They took some stuff out. They added some stuff in. But the more redundancy of 1-drops that aggro decks have in the cube, or 2-drops, that just means they get better. And they have gotten better, I think. They have changed that. So that's like a big picture look to, you know, the way things have changed. And they got rid of a lot of the junk, kind of like I was saying, right? Like, Repeater Reverberation, Black Bloom Rogue, Key to the City, all these, like, almost just laughable cards, kind of, almost meme cards. There was, you know, last Cube season, I kept trying to put Black Bloom Rogue in my deck, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm almost mono black, I can afford a tapped land, you know, I think this is going to be good this time, and it still just wasn't good. You know, like, Cube decks, they thrive on efficiency, they thrive on all your cards just, you know, being able to cast all your cards. So, like, all these, like, dorky MDFCs, they took those out. These like really situational Johnny Timmy-ish cards, I think they took a lot of those out. There's still some of them, but they trimmed a lot of the fat. So yeah, once again, this is just another thing that adds to the decks being more streamlined, is all the junk got cut, basically. And so I've heard the headline of the cube this time around is Mono Red got nerfed, and I looked at the cube list and like, I guess like Mono Red got nerfed ? So basically, what I think, you know, the cards here, Annex, Goblin Chain Whirler, Hellrider, these are the big losses from the deck. There's 1 or 2 other things. But what made Mono Red so good last time is that there was so much redundancy. And so, yes, you cut Hellrider, which is one of the best cards, but you still get Embercleave, Hazoret, Glorybringer, right? Like, and those are just the top end cards. You still have all the really cheap cards. They cut a few of them, but they replaced them with other ones. So I really don't think Mono Red got worse. If Mono Red got worse, it's not because its cards got worse. It's maybe because the other strategies got better, right? And so I'm still going into this event thinking, I'm going to be first picking Hazards, first picking Embercleave. Like, these are some of the better cards in the cube. These three right here, Glorybringer, Embercleave, Hazoret, right? I don't know. It's a strange design choice to me, basically, right? Like, the fact that they're pushing mono red so hard, either intentionally or unintentionally, is just strange for a cube that is, ostensibly it's not the most competitive cube in the world because it's not ranked or anything. So why they have decided to push mono red to the limits they have is an enigma to me, basically. But takeaway here is I think mono red is still very good. One thing I want to say, just a big picture, not in this cube iteration in general, but in general, is that last time when I did a lot of draft log reviews for the cube when it was up, 3 months ago or whatever, I think the biggest thing that I kept saying over and over is you have to kind of identify what the difference between a normal limited bomb is and a cube bomb is, right? So a card like Toski, Turgrid, these cards are great in normal limited, but they're a little bit slow, a little bit clunky. I think Toski actually has some legs, as in like a splash in like a mono white deck or like a blue, a cheap mono blue splash Toski tempo flyer deck, right? Has its place, but it's not going to be generically good card like it might be in normal draft, right? Same with Turgrid, it's just a little bit slow. Generally, you want to, the power is so much, it's so concentrated on the cheap cards in cube. Even this cube, even the Arena Cube, where the deck list is slower. Or sorry, the card pool is slower, or it's more expensive. There's just more expensive cards, but even still, you should try to pick those cheap cards early because there's a million expensive cards, right? There's like infinite 5-drop and 6-drop finishers. You don't need to take those early. Harmonious Archon, which isn't in the cube anymore, but that's like a perfect example of like, oh man, this card is sick in draft, but just, it's not that good in cube. So where you should be focusing your early picks is on, cheap utility cards, cheap cards in general, and then save the few top end spots for the really, really great cards like those Glory Bringers, like the, Hornet Queens if you're like a mono green ramp deck or something. And another big picture thing is that good mana is just essential. Right, if you've consumed any cube content, you're gonna know this. But you're going to need to pick up dual lands. Just you need to prioritize them, right? The reason being that number one, it's much more punishing to be to miss your land drops, right, or to not hit your colors on time, right? Because your opponents are just gonna have more powerful cards. Right, they're going to be curving out on you, and when they do curve out on you and you stumble for a turn, that's just so much more punishing than a normal draft. In normal draft, if you're missing a color, that's okay, maybe for a turn or two. Your opponent's not going to always run over you. But in cube, they're either going to be playing like a mono red aggro deck or a mono white aggro deck, or they're going to be like ramping to some super powerful thing, and if you can't cast your cards, that's just death, right? The other reason is that, in general, because cube is comprised of higher rarity cards, that means that just the way Magic design works is usually higher rarity cards are costed with double pips more often, right? You're not going to see single pipped cards. You're going to see red and green in the mana cost, right? So your cards are just generally hard to cast, right? Harder to cast than a normal limited. That means your mana base has to be a little bit better, right? So just account for that. There's 5 or 6 dual lands, I think, for each color pair. Although it's strange, because I think for some reason the green-blue and the black-green temples were taken out. I don't know why. So black-green and green-blue get 1 fewer dual land than the other color pairs. No clue why, but that's just what it is. But anyways, you're gonna have enough fixing if you pick it up. And you probably will have to pick it up at a reasonable rate, because if you're in a pod with people who know what's up, those dual lands are going to go pretty early. Oh yeah, and worth noting that they added the pathways, right, from Kaldheim, right, the pathways that weren't here before. I think they also added Terramorphic Expanse, which is just an Evolving Wild variant, so that's pretty cool too. The last big picture thing I want to say before I get into the specifics of what got added, what got taken out, is draft how you want to draft, because that's the beauty of Cube, right? It's very choose your own adventure in nature, right? If you want to draft a 5-color Asika Prismatic Bridge deck, go ahead, draft that. If you want to draft a mono red deck and first pick Soulscar Mage like a Maniac, like I would, draft that too. I think that there's going to be some amount of objective power level. And for example, I think that mono red and mono white are probably much better decks. Not much better. I don't want to oversell it, but I think they're better decks than like a rampy green deck in this cube, in this particular cube, right? But don't let that affect your decision too much, right? Because when it comes down to it, most people are playing cube to have fun. And if you think it's fun to, cast play a 5-color green deck, by all means, first pick a Sika or something like that, So yes, I do think if you want to spike it, you should probably be first picking mono red cards and mono white cards, but don't let that influence your decisions all that much. You can still definitely win with a 5-color green deck or something like that. Okay, so let's get into the notable adds and cuts from each color, starting with white. So I think white got the biggest upgrade. Not that I think it got a lot of good adds, but it also just took out so many bad cards, like Countless Gear Renegade, Arrestor Zeal, Idol of Endurance, like all these super clunky cards that are ostensibly supposed to go in like a mono white deck, but are just not very good. A lot of those got taken out. There's still 1 or 2 odd inclusions in there, but where white really leveled up is the fact that it doesn't have these cards littering the pack anymore. The notable exclusions are Wrath of God and Sky Marcher Aspirant, because Wrath is just, one of the better Wrath effects in the format, and Sky Marcher Aspirant is super important for the mono white decks just because the density of 1-drops is important. At the same time, they got replaced with arguably better upgrades. I mean, Doomscar and Wrath of God, you can argue their merits, but I think Usher of the Fallen is generally a better 1-drop than Sky Marcher Aspirant. So, lost some good cards, but gained, comparable replacements, I would say. And it gained quite a few good things, too. It gained Clarion Spirit, which is a great card for the mono white deck. Not even a mono white deck. I can just go in, like, any white deck and be decent. Momentary Blink is a really interesting one. 1 and a white for an instant. Exile a target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under your control. Flashback for 3 and a blue. I think this card opens up, kind of opens up the path for just a new archetype. There's a few other Blink cards in there that got added, along with Yorion, which I think was always there. And so just be on the lookout for things that can be blinked. I think that's a really cool little sub. Maybe it's not your entire deck, but it's a little sub pocket of synergy if you want to call it that. Where in like a blue-white control deck or a green-white mid-range deck, you can be like blinking stuff, and that's just like a cool little thing you can do. Starnheim Unleashed, we all know how busted that card is. I think that Starnheim, well, probably not. The difference between Starnheim and the next best card in Cube and Starnheim and the next best card in Kaldheim Limited is probably, the gap closed a little bit. Yeah, but still, Starnheim's going to be really, really good. So that's a great add for white, both on a white control deck and a fine card for your white aggro decks too. Like just an okay top end card. Worst case scenario, if you're tight on mana, 4 mana 4/4 flyer is just going to be good in your white aggro deck still. White also just got a bunch of decent things for, just a decent mono white aggro deck. Sigrid, Adorn Pouncer, Thraben Inspector, to name a few. There's a few more on the list if you want to check it out. By the way, somebody, if they could, maybe post a link to the updates, if that would be good for chatters that I want to check those out. The ins and outs, that is. Is Starnheim too expensive for what aggro wants to do generally? I don't think so, Xmorty. I think that, just go back to Starnheim for a second, like, the fail case of this as 4 mana 4/4 flyer is just fine. That's a little bit overcosted for what a super low to the ground mono white deck wants to do. But the times you flood out and you do draw 6 lands, this card's gonna be just such a fantastic way to use those lands, right? A lot of flexibility in the card. And that's where a lot of the power comes from. So yeah, this is just a collection of the cards they added that I think are going to be good for the mono white deck. And thanks, baby. I appreciate you posting that list. One of the things is I think that the mono white deck last time around was good but not great, and I think it gained the most out of any deck basically, just with all these additions. It gained a lot of good 2-drops, it gained a lot of good 3-drops, and it gained, like I said, the Usher of the Fallen, which is pretty nice, and Thraben Inspector, which nothing to sneeze at. Let's move on to blue. I think blue is the least affected actually out of all of the colors. Like, it got rid of a lot of junky cards and replaced them with like slightly less junky cards, but nothing that's like archetype defining. it got, its overall card quality got better, right? Just like with any other color. But it didn't lose anything super important to any archetype, and it didn't gain anything that's like archetype defining either. It lost essence capture and a cheap counterspell, but that's not the biggest loss in the world. As I said before, the blue controlling decks do kind of thrive on redundancy and just having a lot of cheap counters, so that they can reliably, have cheap counters and have instant speed card draw spells, so that when your opponent doesn't cast anything, you can cast your Behold the Multiverse or whatever, right? Just having that package of 10 instants, that really plays well with itself, basically. And so Essence Capture is one little loss there, but it gained quite a bit in that regard. It gained Saw It Coming, right, which is just arguably just better, probably just better in general. Again, Elrond's Epiphany, which I think is actually a pretty nice get for, like, a deck that's going bigger. Like, not so much in this kind of style of blue control deck I'm talking about, where you want to have, like, a bunch of permission and card draw. But it's fine there, too. And this is a pretty nice card for, like, a blue-green ramp deck, or, like, a multicolored ramp deck. Kind of, if anybody knows, like, Teamer Epiphany. That might be Teamer Adventures still, with Epiphany at the top end in Standard. Kind of the same idea, where you just have, like, all this ramp, all these powerful mid-range cards, and then Elrond Epiphany at the top end to be like, oh, okay, well, I have this giant board, and now I just get to take 2 turns, plus these 2 flyers. Probably better in Cube than in normal limited, just because, the power of an extra turn you're taking is amplified when your cards are better, basically, right? You're casting more powerful stuff, you get to use your mana better. So yeah, I think this is a decently large get. Behold the Multiverse, nice card draw spell, nothing too special, but I think this card, again, is probably even better in Cube than is in normal limited, just because the cards you're drawing are going to be better, right? Just, you draw 2 more powerful cards, you hit your land drops to hit your expensive cards, so pretty nice get for blue. Like I said, blue overall didn't, gain or lose anything critical to its identity as a color, but, little upgrades here and there. Got rid of some of the junk. I do like these two, actually, Fae of Wishes and Cosima. So Fae of Wishes is nice, especially in Best of One. Fae of Wishes is, especially, the granted side, the side where you go and get a sideboard card and put it into your hand, is pretty cool, especially in Best of One. In Cube, you're going to just have more powerful cards in your sideboard in general than you would in normal limited. Plus, it's like a 1/4 flyer against the mono red deck as a blocker when you need that, which is pretty valuable, again, in Best of One, when you don't have the option of sideboarding in or sideboarding out. The flexibility of this kind of card, where it's like good against the aggro decks and good against the control decks. You cast Granted to go get a big finisher that wasn't in your main deck against those decks. That's pretty nice. Also, it's just like a value engine too. If the game goes long, by discarding discarding 2 cards to return this to get like a bunch of cards from your sideboard. So I think this is a pretty nice get for the blue decks. Cosima as well is pretty nice, again, for those like blue-green decks. If you're putting a bunch of lands into play, generally in Call Time, you weren't putting additional lands into play to really buff Cosima's counters. But you can get sometimes, over the course of 4 turns, 6 counters on her by ramping with Cultivate style cards, right? So that's kind of interesting too. And I think that Fae of Wishes, just to touch on a bigger picture concept, especially if you're playing in Best of One, is that there's a lot of cards they added to the cube, and this is just on merit of the kind of cards they've been designing lately, that are good in Best of One because they're good early, good late, can go get stuff from your sideboard, have modality basically. So look for those kind of cards. Those kind of cards are pretty important. Black also didn't have too much change to it, I don't think. Orzhov Enforcer and Rotting Register are 2 of the better cards they cut. I really liked Orzhov Enforcer because I really liked Red Black Sacrifice in the other iteration of the cube. I think that was one of the better decks. Rotting Register are just like a decent aggressive threat. Black in general is like still keeps its sacrifice theme, which I think was really good. One of the problems of Black traditionally in Cube is that they just it just as a color didn't have too much of an identity, and they've been printing a lot of good sacrifice cards lately, so it's nice that this cube actually gets to put into practice, oh look, we've been printing all these sacrifice cards, let's put them all together and see how they play, and they do play pretty well. So yeah, it lost Orzhov Enforcer, which isn't huge, but it's meaningful, and lost Regisaur, which kind of matters because there's it's weird that they cut this card to me because They also tried to plant in like a small reanimator theme this time around, and Regisaur is good there. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Also, another color that they cut a bunch of the crap from, Black Bloom Rogue, like I said. Cry of the Carnarium was always strange to me because so many of Black's cards wanted to die and not get exiled. Like, you were playing to the board so often with all these sacrifice effects with your like Priest of the Forgotten Gods and your Rose Striders and stuff like that. So it was just like a very niche sideboard card when you weren't doing that, but also wanted a -2 sweeper. That card got cut. Add-ins, a lot of good stuff actually for the sack decks. Timurit Calls the Dead, nice little value card. They took out Kroxa, mind you. So that the red-black sack deck lost that, and Timurit, unfortunate, because Timurit Calls the Dead plays very well with Kroxa. But, alas, what can you do? Malakir Rebirth, this is an MDFC I'm actually kind of excited about because it's super cheap, plays well with what Black wants to do. So this is a card I'm, at least tentatively looking to include in my deck. In a few days I might go, okay, no, this card's actually still crap. I don't want these stupid low-powered MDFCs in my deck. But I think this one has legs. I think this one actually... could be good in the black sacrifice decks. And then I think the biggest get is, of course, Valky. Like, again, kind of like Fate of Wishes, good early, good late, blocks against their mono reds 2-mana 2/2, or just is a good trump card in the grindy controlling matchups. Also, like, not only blocks early, but kind of just, can steal their sweet card and turn into it. Sometimes you steal... I guess you can't steal Kroxa anymore. That'd be sweet. That's not in the cube anymore. But sometimes the turn into whatever you steal ability is relevant. So not only just as a thing to trade off with, but as something where you can steal a rest card. And Valky's just great. I'm sure anybody who's played with this card knows how good it is. And I think its value does not change too much in cube, basically. So let's talk about red. Quick water break for me before we do. So again, these are the cards that got cut. Annex, Chain Whirler, Hellrider. Definitely meaningful, but not that meaningful in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, I think Mono Red is still very good. They also got Robber the Rich and Scorch Spitter cut, which, again, going back to the whole redundancy thing, is meaningful because the more cheap cards you cut, the less redundancy you have. But if Scorch Spitter, Robber the Rich, Hellrider, Chain Whirler, and Annex are like the cuts, right? If that's the punishment Mono Red had to take for still being, pretty much a top tier deck, I would say. Like, that's fine. I'm okay cutting good 3-drop, good finisher, and a few early cards, right? Because like I said, there's still, if you look at the list, still so many good cards along the curve. I think that it's, once again, I'm going to say it again, but it's odd that they've decided to push Mono Red as hard as they have in this cube. Red also benefits, once again, like blue and like white, from just a lot of the crap being cut, right? Cathartic Reunion, Repeated Reverberation, all these things like that just didn't have a place. Morog, these clunky finishers. So those got cut. They got replaced by other cheap cards, which of course is great. I don't think I'm going to argue this, but I could argue that Mono Red might even have gotten better because these cards were cut. Like, yes, it lost these previous cards I just talked about, but it gained more redundancy and just good cheap cards that they put in. Magda, Dragonkin Berserker, 2 great 2-drops they added in. I think that, Magda loses a little bit of value because you don't get the Sake Dwarf Tribal. But you do still get the treasure ability. And I already liked Captain Lannery Storm, which is a very similar card to Magda. It makes treasures when it attacks, but this is just a cheaper version. Also good in the red-black sacrifice decks with Mayhem Devil, where, you care about sacrificing stuff. So I think Magda's a big get. Dragonkin Berserker is a reasonably large get. And then Thermal Alchemist is interesting, where a lot of my mono red decks are not burn-heavy mono red decks in this cube. They're much more creature-based. And so I think this is it's a card more for the blue-red deck, which didn't really get there last time. And so it's a little bit of a nudge for that deck. I think you can still play it in some mono-red decks that are a bit more burn-heavy. But that's just not how the mono-red decks tend to pan out in this format all that often. It's really good, though, by the way, this card. Thermal Alchemist, if you haven't played with or against this card, this is quite a good card. It's responsible for, it's a persistent source of damage, but then sometimes deals like 2 to 3 on some turns, which is really nice. Let's talk about green now. Green lost Lotus Cobra and it lost Questing Beast, which, you know, I mean, it lost a ramp creature. It lost one of its boom booms in Questing Beast, which is good, right? I think that I had problems. I took umbrage with green last time around. I think it just fell a little bit short. And I don't think that the updates really solved what my problems with it were. Let's get into the ins. It gained Asiga's Chariots, and it gained Sawtusk Demolisher, which is probably a weird card that nobody's seen before, so I'll read that one. But Asiga's Chariot's just a very powerful card, even in Cube. This is, you know, it's seeing standard play to speak to its pedigree as a card. It's cool to blink if you can blink it with like Yorion or something, but also just a powerful card in general, and you're going to have more access to other tokens, which is kind of funny, or you can like copy an angel token or something, right? So it's going to be even a little bit better, I think. And you have more ways to push it through as well, right? Just have good removal, good interaction spells in the format. So I think that this is one, you know, I was talking before about limited bombs that, you know, cards in Cube that are worse than they were in their original limited formats just because the cards surrounding them in Cube are so much better. I think this one stays the same and is still very good. Sawtusk Demolisher, 6 mana, 6/6 trample, so it's a Colossal Dreadmaw, but it also has Mutate for 4 mana. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target non-creature permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So it beast within something, right? Which is kind of interesting because 4 mana beast within with a 6/6 attached to it is pretty powerful. Like, even just destroying their land on turn 4 or turn 3. Like, imagine you go like Paradise Druid or something, and on turn 3 you blow up their land and you have a 6/6 that's like pseudo hexproof. That's kind of interesting. There aren't any other mutate cards in the set, so it's just basically a one-time effect, unfortunately. But I think it's a cool ad, and I'm keeping my eye on this one to see how it plays out. Just to talk to green in general, I think, you know, like I was saying before, I think it is one of the weaker colors in the Cube because it lacks where the other decks, the blue decks, the blue decks have a again, they have that redundancy. They have the consistency of a lot of instant speed stuff. The white and the red decks have that consistency of a lot of cheap threats. The green decks lack the consistency of a lot of mana dorks, which is what green really wants to do in Cube a lot of the time. You have quite a few mana dorks, but not quite to the level that I would like to consistently have one early, or consistently have multiples early. And the other problem, I think, is the finishers. You have a few really good ones, right? You have Hornet Queen, you've got like Ulamog, if you can really ramp that out. But I don't think the finishers go over the top of the other decks enough, right? So basically what happens is you have not great early game compared to the other decks, which have good early game, and then your late game, which is the reason why you're putting all these mana dorks in your deck, is still like good but not great. I think you often have trouble going over the top, except for a few key cards. So there's a few key cards that are still good, and you want to prioritize those, like the, like I said, Hornet Queen. We can get to them when we look at the full card list. But that's kind of been my problem with green in general. I think that it can be a good home for multicolor stuff, multicolor green stuff, but at the same time, I think you have to be very careful not for your multicolor green stuff piles not to be piles, right? To actually have synergy, to actually be doing something. Or else you just run into the mid-range problem of my deck is just like a pile of fine cards with my opponent. To go back to what I was originally saying about this new iteration of the Cube, your opponents are going to be doing these streamlined things a lot of the time, whether that be a streamlined aggro deck, a streamlined sacrifice deck, a good control deck, and you're kind of stuck with like single spelling per turn with like reasonable cards, right? Let's move on to colorless here. Ugin got cut, which I think is probably good. I think this card was one of the, well, it's good for the Cube in general, because this is one of the better cards in the Cube. I think it was a little bit too good for the Cube, probably. But it's the green strategy I was just talking about, where it wants those few good top-end threats. It lost this, which is pretty big. Ugin was definitely one of the better cards there. It did gain a few nice things though. H+2 Harvester is just like a powerful, flexible early pick. Reasonable, good against the aggro decks, good in the aggro decks. One of the higher picks in the cube, I'm assuming. It gained these 2 mana dorks, or these 2 mana rocks, which again just adds to redundancy, adds to consistency basically. So yeah, a few nice little gets. And then it gets one strange one. It gets Sword of Body in Mind, which for those of you who don't know about this, it's a 3 mana artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has pro green, pro blue, and whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a 2/2 wolf, and then that player mills 10 cards with equipped 2. And this card is also very strange to me that they included this, because I don't think it's particularly satisfying on either side. Like, when you're the opponent, and you're playing green-blue, and your opponent plays this, you're like, okay, I just lose, because they mill you out in 2 turns. You just lose, basically. And I think the times this goes wrong for you as the player with it, they go, you play it, invest 3 mana, you go to equip it, they blow it out with a removal spell. That's pretty sad. That experience isn't great either. So I think this is a card that just leads to not great experiences. It's a powerful card, mind you. And you should probably take it pretty highly. But I don't think it adds to net good in this cube, basically. So take it highly, but your results may vary for how much fun you have, Let's move on to multicolors here. We're going to round out with a few last cards that they cut and a few adds. They cut Thought Erasure and Scarab God. Scarab God being just like top 3 cards in the cube last time around, so it's understandable that they cut it. Thought Erasure being just, a nice hand disruption spell, but nothing like too insane. Hydra Krasis got cut, which is another... again, going back to the whole, why I didn't like green before, this is another one of those cards that was really good in those green decks. Like, this was a good top-end threat, and they cut it. And they didn't add any replacement, really. They added, comparable cards, but nothing on the level of Hydra Krasis. So, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. Didn't like it before, the green decks, and I don't think they really... I don't know. They have yet to impress me, and the new ads I don't think add too much. But Hydra Krasis got cut. Croxa, which was one of my favorites, that got cut too. Again, one of the more powerful cards in the cube, so that's understandable. What deck wants Sword of Body in Mind? Basically any deck with creatures. Evasion, if you could have Evasion, is great too. If you have Mana Dorks, that's good because it can equip up the Mana Dorks and make use of them basically after they've made mana. But any deck with a reasonable creature count, I'd say, wants Sword of Body in Mind. Moving on to multicolor in. So we got some good ones from Kaldheim here. Showdown of the Skalds, obviously a nice one. Be careful though, because generally, if you're an aggressive deck, you want to be closer to mono red or mono white, not red white split down the middle, just because the mana doesn't work out all that often, because you have white 1-drops and white 2 and white 1 words. Red 1-drops and white 1-drops. That's it. And so unless you have a bunch of the dual lands, you kind of end up in an awkward spot where, if you look at the win rates historically of Boros decks in cube and the mono white and the mono red decks in cube, the mono white and the mono red decks have a much higher win rate, just on merit of how good the mana is, right? You don't gain all that much from adding that second color, but you lose a lot of the consistency. So while Showdown's going to be a good card, I just want to caution that this is going to be more of a splash in a mono red deck or a splash in a mono white deck, right? Kaya is just a really powerful card. One of the better planeswalkers in the cube. Potentially the best planeswalker in the cube, honestly. If not, top 3, I think. So just generically good card. Immersturm Predator is really nice. Again, Red-Black Sacrifice is one of the better decks in the cube, and this is a really nice get as a free sack outlet, basically. Obviously, anybody who's played against this card or with this card knows it can just run away with the game. But yeah, it's just nice that we get another toy, basically, for the red-black deck. And then last thing here, I want to talk about just archetypes. Mono Red, we talked about that a little bit, but I think still very good. I have nothing else to say about it. I have nothing else that I haven't already said, basically. Red-Black Sacrifice, I think, is also one of the top decks as well still. You get the Mayhem Devil, Priest of the Forgotten God, Woe Strider stuff going on. It did lose Witch's Oven, but that wasn't a huge card. I think that's like the one big card it lost, and that was only a card that I'd play in like some of my builds when I was super sacrifice heavy. So really this deck didn't lose a lot, and it gained quite a bit too of the good red cards and the good black cards that came in. Blue black good cards. We lost Scarab God, but we gained Thief of Sanity. We gained Hostage. Or sorry, we kept. Sorry, these were always there. We kept Thief of Sanity and kept Hostage Taker, which are two of the more absurd cards in the cube. So very happy about that. This was one of my favorite archetypes in the cube. It just is basically like you can be either more blue controlling or more black grindy and just be splashing whatever other color. Both ways work basically. And yeah, you just win off merit of having better cards than the opponent. These are two of the better cards in the cube. And if you can pick these up, fantastic, right? Mono whites. I think this is one of the bigger winners, I think, just because, again, a lot of the crap was cut from the crappy white cards and a lot of really good cards were added. So I'm excited to, where I wasn't super excited to draft mono white last time, I think I'm a little more excited to draft it this time. Blue white control, another one that was pretty darn good. Classic blue white control, field wipes, removal, card draw, counter spells, all the goodies basically. I think what's something interesting is maybe we could go into, maybe on a later date or later in the stream after the seminar, but just going to archetype breakdowns, really just talking about like what each of these decks really wants, because these are very generic basically, and I'm just kind of talking out my thoughts about the better archetypes, and I think these are the better archetypes, to be clear. But yeah, blue white control was one of my favorite archetypes as well. Approach from the Second Sun, just a really good finisher. But really, classically, the control decks don't really care what their finishers are. They just care about how they're surviving, how they're, how they're getting to the late game. So, there's that. And Search for Riscanta plus Approach from the Second Sun. I have this here because nice little combo there. Just find your search or find your approach very, very easily. Talked about this as well, but the green stuff, multicolored green decks, where I think that, your mileage is going to vary. Again, I think these are the decks that people are more drawn to. Generally, people like these rampy green decks. So, again, going back to what I said before, if this is what you want to be doing in Cube, by all means do it. I don't think it's one of the higher win rate decks, but don't let that stop you, basically. Okay, so top cards, we'll just go through quickly. I'm going to just point out some of the standouts, basically. Clarm, bad time! Clarm. After. Okay, so let's just point out some of the top cards in the cube, basically. And I guess this is very archetype specific. It could also not be though, because I could just point out, the early picks basically. It's kind of tricky because, again, because Cube is so pick your own adventure. Like Legion's Landing, which is one of the better mono white cards, and like just all these 1-drops, kind of count as the best cards. You know what I mean? But I'll go through more generically good cards, I think. So I think if you were looking to get, let's just go by archetype or by color, right? So like, yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a great way to do it. Just we'll look at what cards draw me into the archetype. So as for mono white, Luminarch Aspirant, let's just do like the top few in each color. Luminarch Aspirant is a huge one. Card's just like mega powerful. If you're seeing any of these 1-drops late, that's a reasonable sign that mono white is open. Clarion Spirit's another really good one, obviously. But Luminarch Aspirant's just like, you play this card in turn 2 and you win a lot of the time. They don't deal with it. And obviously there's stuff like God's Willing where you can protect it and stuff. Moving on, we've got Seasoned Hallowblade. Thalia is a weird one because it's good in a lot of like vintage cubes, but I think it's not that great in these cubes. Maybe it got better in this iteration, but I know in the previous iteration, like a lot of your cards in your mono white deck were just non-creatures. Like they were like planeswalkers or enchantments or stuff like that. So Thalia hurt you almost as much as she helped you, but you can definitely change. You can have a really good Thalia deck if you have like 18 creatures for sure. And I wouldn't take her too early, but be on the lookout for times when she's very, very good. Because if you can make her one-sided, she's pretty busto. Season Hellblade, obviously, you know how good this card is if you play with it. Heliod's another really, really good one. Maul of the Skyclave. So I guess for mono white aggro, let's just go through all those. I would say Legion's Landing, any of these 1-drops, basically. Luminarch Aspirant, Clarion Spirit, Season Hellblade, Thalia is a sometimes food, Heliod, Maul of the Skyclaves. Skyclave Apparition is a huge one. This one's so good. Just being able to answer anything and just getting a huge tempo boost is really, really nice. I don't know how Sigrid plays, to be honest. I imagine good but not insane. Banalish Marshal, decent too. Then we get up to these expensive things where it doesn't really matter too much. Ooh, Machias isn't an expensive one, but it's in the expensive slot here. Where it's like, this is a very good card. At any x equals anything, basically. Just not 0. Don't do x equals 0. But if you can do like x equals 1 on this and start growing it for no mana and then pumping your team later, or just, turn 5, cast this for 4, and then it pumps your team every turn, that's very, very good. I think Elspeth Conquers Death is probably top 10 cards in the cube. It just does so much. In a mid-rangey, like green-white deck, or in a aggro deck as your top end card, quite good. Although, in the aggro decks, it's definitely worse, but it's still very good. And then we have like these Angel top end cards, which are all pretty interchangeable, honestly. I think Starnheim's the best, but let's see. Moving on to blue stuff. Blue doesn't have a lot that draws me in. Like if you're looking at these cards, there's like not a lot. Nothing draws me in is the thing. Right? Pact Negation is pretty good. The thing about Pact Negation, it looks kind of dorky. Oh, you probably can't see it very well. Sorry, chat. Can I drag? No, I can't. But it's a 0-mana counter spell that you have to pay 5 on your upkeep or you lose the game. But the thing with Pact Negation that's good in Cube is that you can like tap out on turn 5 for a really big thing, and if they go to remove it, like you cast like a fatty, like one of the, a haymaker, right? And usually the problem with those haymakers, like let's say, I don't know, an angel, a big angel, is that you're investing a lot of mana, and they have like a 2-mana removal spell to kill it. Well, if you can, keep up a free counter spell and still cast your giant thing, that's really, really good, right? So I do like Pact Negation quite a bit. Let's see. Nothing else. Yeah, like there's no draws into blue, is the thing. Search is one of the better ones for sure. Search for Ascanta. Blue kind of just thrives on its redundancy of like cheap instants. And just keeping up instant speed stuff. Shark Typhoon. Shark Typhoon's actually a big one. That's a big payoff. So yeah, that's one card that draws me in. Oh, Sublime Epiphany, also pretty good. Yeah, Sublime Epiphany. Actually, these three blue cards here are probably the biggest draws into like, I want to draft a blue control deck, right? Other than that, everything's fairly interchangeable. As for black plays like the nice, grindy, sacrifice/aggressive game. Knight of the Ebon Legion was one of the best cards. Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't mention that one. This Scholar of the Lost Troves, really weird card, but like it flashes back an instant sorcery artifact when you cast it. Now, it needs a little bit of setup, and it's a little more expensive than like Torrential, but it's a good payoff. Knight of the Ebon Legion is just such a fantastic one-drop. Really, really great card. Like, good on turn 6, good on turn 1, right? Yeah, this is what I'm going to be first picking a lot, basically. Thoughtseize is also quite good. I know there's like Thoughtseize naysayers, but I like it a lot. I'm a big fan. Dreadhorde Invasion is mostly very bad. If you have a lot of sacrifice stuff to make use of the token each turn, it can be fine. But like the plan of slowly make a thing bigger is not good. It's like, I think this card gets. When I wrote my article for CFB a few months ago about the cube, and like I looked at the most overrated cards, like where I thought what cards are most overrated. I looked at where they were taken on average. I think Dreadhorde Invasion is like one of the ones that was like taken really, really highly for how good it is. Like, it gets taken like 4th or 5th or something. This card is not Bitter Blossom. Priest of the Forgotten Gods, another really, really big one. This one's huge. Really, really good card. Key to the Sacrifice decks. Skyclave Apparition, also quite good. Blood Artist is another one. Is Commit to Memory in this cube? That's a good question. I want to say it is. Yeah, so that's another little combo with Scholar and Torrential Gearhulk. You can cast, the nice thing with Torrential, you can go like, commit your thing at a turn, commit Memories in my grave, cast Torrential to cast the memory side of it, draw 7. Valky's another really good one. Elspeth's Nightmares. Oh man, this card's real good. This card's real good. Woe Strider, pretty important for the Black Sacrifice decks. Gonti's a nice one. Phyrexian Obliterator is mostly a trap. Like, the card is okay. There's definitely some games where you're like, you're the opponent and you go, they land an Obliterator and it's like, oh yeah, I can't really beat that. You're like a red aggro deck or something. But even still, the red aggro decks kind of still have game against this card a lot of the time. Like, they just go around it on a big turn, or you get them to like 6 or something, you burn them out. I see people jamming this card in, or taking it highly, with high hopes. But black is not an easy cost. Murderous Rider, yeah, it's a fine card. I like these two, Citadel and Command the Dread Horde, as like big finishers in my black grindy decks. Witch of the Moors is a really interesting one too. That's a really good question, everyone's like, why does this have the Theros set symbol? I have no clue. Definitely wasn't in Theros. And then red. The cards draw me in. All these cards. No. Soulscar Mage is a really good one. Probably the best one dropped in the cube. Do you think Citadel or Command is better if I had to choose one in a vacuum? Probably Citadel. It just requires less setup, basically, and it's a huge combo. Like, it's a win condition where, like, sometimes you just play it and you sack 10 things and they die. It's an instant win with Mayhem Devil if you have 10 things, so. And it just, requires less setup than this card, like I said. Let's see. For Mono Red, the real, like, powerhouse stuff, it's weird because, like, hey, Environmental Downward, thanks for that sub. Really appreciate that. Red's really weird because, like, the most important cards are here, but the most enticing cards are here, Like, I'm going to take Hazard first, for sure. And, like, Embercleave or whatever. But you've really got to take all these cheap cards, right? Is Cruel Reality a trap? Yeah, this card is just not very good. It's just too clunky, too expensive. Yeah, it's kind of a paradox where, like, you get drawn in by these cards, but you really need to prioritize these cards, the cheap ones. Obviously, Glorybringer, Embercleave, busted. I guess I should talk about the X-Burn spells, because this is something that trips people up a lot, where I don't really want these cards in my red aggro decks very much. They're just too inefficient. Like, Perforos' Intervention is decent because it is efficient, like it kills a big thing for cheap, or fireballs them, quote unquote. This is the one X spell I think is okay, but these two are like just too clunky, basically. Moving on to green, Llanowar Elves and Gildagoose are huge just because they're the only one mana dorks. All these mana dorks are important. Like, there's not that many of them in the cube, like I said, so the ones you can get are important. Especially like a 3 mana dork is so much worse than a 2 and a 1 mana dork, right? So you have all these 3 mana ones, and like not many 2s. So prioritize the 2 mana ones when you can. Wolf Haven even. Like I said before, Chariot's good. Oracle's one of the better cards in the cube. Just, full stop. Card just generates an insane card advantage and ramp. Gargaroth, really good. Dagtusk, decent. Yeah, all these top end cards are fine. Great Henge is another really big one. Like, this is just like, again, top 10 cards in the cube. Very, very good. And yeah, and then we just get the gold cards, which some are, they're not all built equally for sure, right? Like, these gold cards are okay. I like Yorion, actually, because that's like a whole deck in itself where you're blinking things. Loris's Busto, top 3 cards in the cube, I would say. All these blue-black cards are good. Ashiok's an interesting one. Was this always here? I don't know if this was always here. But these 3 are great. Red-blue is weird. It's Agar. Agar is a weird one. It's kind of cool, though. The black-red ones are great. The black-green ones are reasonable. The red-green ones are kind of whatever. Escape's good, though. Escape's really good. Yeah, red-white doesn't care too much about its gold cards, because you don't really want to have, like, kind of like I was saying before, you don't really want to... I mean, if you have all the dual lands, like the untapped ones, sure. But I'm not looking to cast a red-white 2-drop all that often, or a red-white 3-drop, Reinforcements is a good splash, and so is Showdown. Both those are good top-end cards, but... And then, yeah, we'll get to the, like, green X stuff is kind of fishy. Like, these green-blue cards are, like, whatever. Green-white ones are okay, too. Tristani's good. Yeah, and that's it. I guess colorless, too. Field of the Dead, like I mentioned before. Sword Body of Mind. Crystalline Giant, another big one. Oh, note about Maze Mind Tome. Here's a mistake I see people make a lot. Is they just, like, scry with their tome. Try your very best not to scry with this. Unless you really need to, like, get full value out of it. You don't want to just be like, scry for a few turns and draw some cards. I see a lot worse than it is in normal draft. Just, like, a little clunky. It's good with Wraths. If you have Wraths, it's good. Because it makes them commit. And then, after you Wrath, they usually only have 1 or 2 things. You can lock those down. These 2 cards are decent. I think these 2 suffer a little bit from being, like, good draft cards, but not great cube cards. They're just, like, a little bit expensive for what you get. How's Karn? Karn's decent. Yeah. I mean, you kind of want, like, a Karn deck in the sense that, like, you want to be making artifacts to make this card good. Yo, Filbert coming in with the 10 tier 1 subs. Thank you so much, Filbert. Holy crap. Filbert, you rock. Make my day. Make my day, why don't you, Filbert? Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that, Filbert. Much love. Hope you're doing well. Happy Friday, Filbert. Happy Friday. I'll drink to that. Alright, I guess we'll do a little pause here. Whoa! Jesus Christ. We got the sub war going on again. NCAA gifting 10 tier 1 subs. NCAA, your first stream back, and you're already at it again. Thank you so much, both of you. What would I do without you? What would I do without you two? You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Hope your day's going well. Y'all are the best. Oh my, wait, I thought this was the same thing. Filbert, holy crap. What are you doing? Filbert, holy crap. We haven't even gotten to drafting yet. Filbert, oh my god. Holy, this is a good Friday. Thank you so much, Filbert. You rock. And NCAA, you both rock. Stars of the stream, I gotta say. Stars of the stream. How do I almost banned you accidentally. Filbert, I'm sorry. I wanted to make you VIP. And NCAA. Alas. I can't do it on my mobile. Yeah, you deserve VIP. You two both deserve VIP for sure. Is someone still without sub? Raise your hand if you are without sub. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that, guys. All right, let's get back into some Magicking just real quick. Yeah, me too, Insurrectionist. I'm a little bit surprised, actually. They pushed it a little bit. They added 1 or 2 cards, but not that much. Not that many. I'm not sure why. Yeah, hashtag best chat. Yeah, gifts, I think so. So yeah, just talk about Karn quickly. Karn is good just as a value engine, but you would like to make tokens off of it, so make some concessions to that in the draft. Yo, NCEA! Gifting 1 more. Thank you so much! Just love NCEA. You have to edit all this out for the video. Somebody at WotC loves this card. I don't know what it is, but this card hasn't gotten cut in 3 iterations. I'm not sure why. I think that's it, though. I think that's it as far as colorless stuff goes. Oh, I love Treasure Map, too. This is a really nice combo with Mayhem Devil. Love it. Love this card with Mayhem Devil. Yeah, exactly, yeah. If they put just Spirit Sentinel in, Throne would be too good. That's why just Spirit Sentinel's not in the cube. And that's it. Alright. Chat, I think now is the time. Is Platinum Angel good? Nah, it's okay. It's expensive. It's usually very easy to remove, you know? So yeah, let's just get into some draft skis. Wait.